Richard, a very interesting video. I must say, interesting premise on which to begin your series, or interesting rhetorical question. It does say a lot about how the BNP sees itself. I don't really want to get too much into this because I honestly think that what goes on inside of Britain is none of my business. I'm a Canadian, and, what goes on inside of my own country I don't care about because I'm a Canadian. But it's interesting that the word fascism keeps coming up, and it's kind of an overused term and kind of has been for the last 50 years maybe. But it doesn't mean that it isn't a legitimate fear, and it's interesting how everyone's pointing at everybody else and saying, yeah, you're the one with the swastika underneath that cardigan that you're wearing. Yeah, I see you've got a black shirt under there. Now, I think that it's not altogether useless to actually look at those analogies, the fascist analogy, because I think that these modern movements, which the smell of fascism always clings to them in strange sorts of ways. You get people like Geert Wilders and Pat Condell and Nick Griffin kind of being seen in the same light when they seem to be quite different people, espousing quite different ideologies or whatever. But that's kind of the way that the original fascists came around. It was an amalgam, a mishmash of different ideas, left, right, modern, representing dynamism, representing a move forward in terms of European and world civilization. And that's why people were sort of blindsided by the appearance of classical or original fascism in the 1920s and 30s. They didn't quite know what to make of it, because it didn't fit into the normal left-right dynamic of traditional politics. And I think that that's one of the great advantages of the modern sort of, whatever you want to call that group of people that tend to be lumped together that way. The new sort of right-wing, ethnic or nationally or patriotically or values-based kind of groups, like Pat Condell says, yes, I'm opposed to Islam out of a sense of modernity, out of a sense of decency, out of a sense of tolerance, out of a sense of liberalism. And I think Mr. Wilders says, the same thing. The BNP might sort of say, well, we oppose this sort of thing because it's just not consistent with our traditions, i.e. Islam. And I think that one of the things that really, really makes these two groups sort of mesh in my mind, i.e. the modern sort of values or national-based right wing, i.e. we're standing up for European values, we're standing up for tolerance of national values, and the actual fascists, they have that in common. A lot of people say that the driving force behind Nazi Germany and the Italian fascists, or fascism in Europe in general in the 1920s and 30s, the great scapegoat was the Jew. I don't think that it actually was. Now, it's pretty crazy to say such a thing in hindsight, given what happened in the the mid 1940s in Central Europe to the Jewish people. But when you look at the rhetoric of it all, really the big fear was in Europe wasn't so much Jewish people, because Europeans had lived with Jewish people among them for centuries, millennia even. The fear was something new. The fear was communism. Right over there is Joseph Stalin and the Red Army, and he just wants to pour in here and take over, and the Bolshevik hordes are coming. A lot of people believed that. A lot of people actually hoped for it, because there were, communist parties in Europe. Mostly the left in Europe was socialist, but there were substantial communist parties. So this created a big malaise. There is this big mass just sort of on the fringe of our society that's just waiting to break in here, and it's got sympathizers among us who will become this large mass as accomplices. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Just forget about Joe Stalin and the communists and replace that with the Muslims, and you've got exactly the same dynamic. You've got people like Ernst Röhm in the Nazi Party, who was a socialist, and you had people like Hermann Göring, who was an aristocrat. What did they have in common? Anti-communism. Nowadays, you get the strangest alliances on the extreme right, What do they all have in common? Islamophobia, because that big mass across the Mediterranean is coming to get us. We have to be the protectors of Western values, Western civilization, or national traditional values consistent with our own history. They always have that one thing in common. Not only is there that big mass across the Mediterranean, but there's some here among us, and it makes us afraid. And this new sort of putative fascists are playing on this exactly the same way as the original fascists played on the fear of Stalin. Thank you.